Hello. So this is video 2 for this week. We're going to talk a little bit more about what is entailed in informed consent. Also, we'll talk a little bit about what's going on with deception, because that has implications for what counts as consent. So what is informed consent? This is, you've got to include the purpose of the study. So what are we doing this for? How will we use your data? You've got to include something about the risks that you anticipate for participants. This can be inconvenience, this can be confidentiality issues. There are no studies that have no risk. There's minimal risk, but there's never no risk. So you have to process through what is the worst that could possibly happen in this study, and consider how to protect participants in that case. You've got to make clear to participants that they can refuse to participate, that this is voluntary, and that they can refuse to participate at any point in the research, as dictated by the Nuremberg Code that we went over earlier. You can get consent from a parent if you're working with younger children, so parent or guardian. This may also be important for elderly, to get consent from a legal guardian. And when we're getting consent from a child who's under 18, we call it assent. If we're working with children under the age of 18, we need to both have consent from a guardian as well as assent from the child. So usually we do this in the form of a written out form. You can also do this online, where you read it and click through, and clicking through suggests that you agree. It's important to that the participant knows that they have the autonomy, that it is up to them whether they participate, that they have the choice. So again, with holding information, deception may be important for a particular research study. People aren't very good at correctly telling us about their own behaviors, particularly when those behaviors have something to do with social desirability, and that's an issue. So we'll talk a little bit about deception in the next few slides. Deception has been considered a major issue for psychological research. So there are routine ways that we assess and handle whether deception is okay. Okay, so again, that informed consent has to describe procedures, identify risks and benefits, needs to make clear that the participant can withdraw at any time, and provide contact information for the researcher, and often for the approving body at the researcher's institution. So if I was going to do a study, I'd have to give my information so they could contact me, as well as information so they could contact the institutional review board at Roosevelt's or whatever university I was working under. Informed consent is necessary for all research, unless it's archivable data, because that was initially consented by somebody else and has been held in archives in in ways that are not identifiable. So I can't go back and find those participants again. You can also do covert observations. You don't have to have consent if you are watching people in a public place. You may want to assert with IRB that what a public place is. So generally speaking, I would recommend, if you are planning on doing covert observations, that you file for an exempt status with your IRB. Okay, so autonomy. In informed consent, we have to assess whether the person is able to give informed consent, or whether someone should consent for them. Some age issues come in here. Also, mental health. So is this person able to consent for themselves? It's always more trouble, but much safer for you and participants to make sure that they have somebody who's going to consent for them, so that you get a assent from the person if their autonomy is in question, and consent from some caregiver. So coercion, we need to make sure that there are not unfair pressures for folks to participate. We talked about this a little bit with Tuskegee in the last video, that if you give somebody way too much money, enough that they can't possibly say no to participation, that's considered coercion. Linking stuff to grades can sometimes be considered coercion, if it's kind of a make it or break it kind of a thing. You would fail a class if you didn't participate. Um, that's why we have their rules about how much extra credit you can get for participating in research and how to do that and what that looks like. So there have to be other options for earning the same extra credit. So that's part of all kind of goes into coercion. Excessive rewards, again, when there are excessive rewards, we call that coercion. Okay, so basically, when we are doing the psychological research, we have to assess the balance of risks and benefits. So if there's high benefit, low risk, you do the study. If there's high risk, low benefit, you don't do the study. Those two are easy. The ones that are difficult are low risk, low benefit, or high benefit, high risk. And historically, there have been some high benefit, high risk research that has been done that we have later said, you know what, that is too risky, and we're not okay with that. So we go along kind of refining what is reasonable in terms of risk as a discipline, as a culture. Okay. The same thing we do with benefits. So high benefit, low risk, you do the study. Low benefit, high risk, you don't do the study. Same issue with trying to figure out at what point we go ahead and do the study. So whenever you're doing a study, you've got to consider potential negative reactions participants could have. My dissertation, I was working with kids to have them do origami paper figures, and looking at how they work together and communicate while they were doing that. And I had to consider and account for what I would do if they got a paper cut. Things happen, right? If they happen under your watch as a researcher, you are responsible and you need to have a plan for how you're going to handle it, right? I got Neosporin, I got Band-Aids, we're good, right? So this is when you are including research participants in research, that makes you more responsible for their well-being than you would be if they weren't involved in research. You also got to consider the risks of not conducting a study. So that's kind of also part of this risk benefit analysis that I was talking about on the last few slides. Is it worth what we stand to learn from this? There was a national study that was asking teens about sexual practices that they engaged in, and this study was shut down, partially because of concerns about what it might mean to be asking teens about these things, whether asking about sexual practices was going to help or incite children to participate in those things, if it was alarming or unsafe for kids to be responding about those, whether they were truly confidential responses. So there was a lot of questions there, and ultimately the study was shut down. On the other hand, people still argue, and we can argue here, what was lost? What do we not know about teens' sexual practices because we're not paying, we didn't go ahead and follow through and ask about that. So there is something lost in the not doing of study as well. Okay. So deception. Deception can be unethical in some cases. You've got to show that deception is absolutely necessary to study your topic of interest. One of the main rules about deception is that you can't lie to subjects in order to get them to participate. So you have to be honest about what the procedure is going to be. You can be deceptive about what your purpose in the study is, what your hypothesis is, right? You can keep them blind in that respect to your hypothesis, so not let them know what's going on there, but you can't lie about what is going to occur to them or what they're going to be involved in. They also, even in a deception study, should have the option of removing themselves from the study as soon as they'd like. So you can't lie about the inability to stop participation. When you use deception, you must debrief participants as soon as you are done. So debrief quickly. This is with the hopes that they're not spreading this disinformation, but they're also not there to minimize the hurt done by any deception. A great example of deception, and one that we have talked about often about in psych about whether deception is okay and why and how we can use it, is Milgram's obedience experiment. Milgram was interested in figuring out whether people would do something that was potentially harmful to another person because they were being obedient to an authority figure. Should be a link in the notes for this slide to let you know more about this, or that you can look at to show you more about this experiment. So this is, they were told that the purpose of the research was to examine the effects of punishment on learning. So they were giving people shocks whenever they made a mistake, and the idea was the story was that they were going to look at to see if this was helping folks to learn. That's not in fact what they were looking at. They were looking at obedience, but that was the story that they told participants. The results were really important here. There were major implications for participants in terms of the stress and their well-being, because it was really problematic for lots of them to see how well they obeyed authority, even when this could be hurting somebody. It was a very stressful situation. But lots of people obeyed authority even when we thought that it was going to be hurting somebody else. So this really challenged what we thought about our beliefs about authority. And so this is important research. So we might say that it was high risk, but also high benefit. Okay. So lots of people have argued that deception is necessary for this type of study because we are more forthcoming when we actually feel like we're doing something as opposed to thinking through a hypothetical situation. Costs of the study were pretty major. A lot of folks had PTSD-like symptoms in response to participation in the study. Many were very upset. So the benefits, we know more about how people, why people and how people react to authority, and that people will follow orders, even when this violates some of their beliefs. But it was at a large cost. Okay, so debriefing, this is really important. We have to do this after the study is complete. It is an opportunity for the researcher to deal with any issues that arise because they withheld information. So the goal of debriefing is to get participants back to the well-being, the level of arousal, so not super stressed out, where the place they were before they started, right? So you're trying to ameliorate any potential harmful effects. You've got to explain why they chose to use deception, and you have to route folks to additional resources. So this is one of those things that, again, because of being involved in the study, you may have greater responsibility to participants than you would have if they were not participants in your study. So if you ask people about a history of trauma, you need to have resources paid for, resources available for them to get counseling, at least initially, in response to anything that your research may have brought up. So you are, in asking those folks to become participants, you are taking on more responsibility for their care than you would the average person on the street. And again, you want to make sure that the participant leaves the experiment without any ill feelings for psychology, for you, for the experiment itself. So you're trying to kind of get rid of any negative impact that the experiment could have had on them. So, in some ways, debriefing can be really good. It gives you the opportunity to tell why you did the study. So, read somebody in on the purpose so they can understand the benefits of their volunteering to be participating in a potentially uncomfortable situation. You can tell them a little bit about what your hypothesis is and what results you expect. Most folks consider debriefing a positive experience because now they know, oh, I get why that was weird. It's normalizing their reaction compared to others so that they're not left wondering, I wonder why I did that. Well, lots of people do that, right? Um, and research suggests that debriefing can be effective in ameliorating any bad feelings that participants had, and kind of restoring them to a good sense of self, a good sense of well-being that they had from before the research. So some ways that we get around deception: we can do role playing. You can do simulation studies. So this is real world situations that involve role playing. And then honest experiments, which is where the research participants know what's going on, and they participate in a put together scenario or a situation based on knowing what is happening and what researchers are interested in. And we're going to go ahead and stop here.